The massive viewing screen in the Coalition Command Center showed red dots everywhere. Each dot meant death. Each dot meant another Vorthan warship moving toward their sector. Admiral Zexter stood before the assembled fleet commanders, his scaled hands trembling as he pointed at the display. Katie Brooks sat in the back row, her human uniform looking plain next to the elaborate dress codes of other species. She watched the alien faces around her grow pale with fear. The Saurians hissed softly among themselves. The Celesti floated nervously above their seats. Even the proud Chronari warriors seemed to shrink into their massive frames. The quantum battle computers have run every possible scenario, Admiral, Zexter said, his voice heavy with defeat. We face 17,000 Vorthan ships. They have weapons we cannot match. They have shields we cannot break. They have numbers that make our fleet look like toys. Katie leaned forward. She had seen those same numbers. She had run her own calculations on her personal tablet during the long flight to this emergency meeting. The math was brutal, but she had found something the quantum computers missed. Our survival probability stands at exactly 2%, the Admiral continued. The computers suggest we should evacuate all civilian populations and retreat to the outer rim. Perhaps we can negotiate some form of surrender before they destroy everything we have built. Commander Velther of the Saurian fleet stood up. His reptilian voice carried across the silent room. My people have faced extinction before. We know the value of strategic retreat. Better to live as servants than die as heroes. Captain Lyandra of the Celesti nodded, her translucent form shimmering with distress. The cosmic winds whisper of dark times ahead. Perhaps it is better to bend like grass in the storm than break like rigid trees. Katie felt her jaw clench. She had heard this kind of talk before, back on Earth when the first alien visitors had arrived. They had expected humans to surrender immediately when they saw the vast galaxy and their small place in it. Instead, humans had surprised everyone. By asking how they could help defend it, General Thokron of the Chronari military slammed his massive fist on the table. We are warriors. We die with honor. But we do not throw away lives for empty gestures. 2% means certain death for all. More voices joined the discussion. Species after species explaining why surrender was the only logical choice. Katie listened to their reasons. They made sense from a purely mathematical standpoint. The Vorthan Empire had conquered 47 star systems. They had never lost a major battle. Their technology was decades ahead of anything the Coalition possessed. But Katie had grown up reading stories about humans who faced impossible odds. She remembered tales of soldiers who held bridges against entire armies. She knew about pilots who flew damaged planes into enemy formations. She had studied battles where small groups defeated massive forces through pure determination and clever thinking. Admiral Zexter raised his hand for silence. I understand your positions. The decision will be made by majority vote. But first, I will hear from all fleet representatives. Human Fleet Command, you have not spoken. Katie stood up slowly. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She was the youngest commander present, representing the newest member species of the Coalition. Her voice felt small in the vast chamber, but she spoke clearly. Respectfully, sir, I disagree with the computers. A ripple of shocked murmurs went through the assembled commanders. Admiral Zexther's reptilian features showed surprise. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, are you suggesting our quantum battle computers made an error? No, sir. I think they calculated perfectly, but they calculated the wrong battle. Katie walked to the front of the room. Her tablet showed different numbers, different scenarios. The computers assumed we would fight the way we always fight. Big fleets in formation. Direct engagement. following all the standard military protocols that every species in this room has used for centuries. She pressed a button and her calculations appeared on the main screen. But humans do not always follow standard protocols. On my world, we have a saying. When someone says something is impossible, we like to prove them wrong. Commander Valther hissed softly. Brave words, human, but bravery does not stop plasma cannons. You are right, Katie replied. Bravery alone is not enough. But the computers only calculated direct confrontation. They never considered asymmetric warfare. They never calculated what happens when you refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. General Thokren leaned forward. Explain. Katie pointed to the red dots on the screen. Look at their formation. Perfect coordination. Every ship in its designated position. Their strength comes from unity and overwhelming firepower, but that also creates weaknesses. She highlighted several points on the display. Their communication network requires constant data flow between ships. Their supply lines stretch across multiple systems. Their command structure depends on rigid hierarchy. These are not weaknesses in normal battle, but they become critical vulnerabilities if you can strike behind their lines. Captain Lyandra shimmered with confusion. You suggest we abandon our fleets and attack with single ships? That is suicide. Not single ships, small teams. Fast-moving groups that can slip through their defenses while they focus on our main fleet. Teams trained to think independently, adapt quickly, and strike where they least expect it. Katie pulled up another screen showing her proposed battle plan. Humans excel at one thing better than any other species I have studied. We adapt. We change tactics in the middle of battle. We find solutions when there should be no solutions. We refuse to give up even when everything looks hopeless. Admiral Zexther studied her numbers carefully. Your plan shows higher survival rates, but it requires precise coordination and enormous luck. Sir, with respect, their plan shows 0% survival if we surrender. The Vorthan Empire does not take prisoners. They eliminate species that resist them. At least my way gives you is a chance to fight back. The room fell silent. Katie could feel the weight of their stares. She was asking them to bet everything on human stubbornness and creativity. She was asking experienced military leaders to abandon proven tactics for an untested theory. If we try your approach and fail, we all die, Commander Velther said quietly. Katie nodded. Yes, sir. But if we follow the computer recommendations and surrender, we all die anyway. The difference is whether we face death on our knees or standing up fighting. Admiral Zexther looked around the room at his commanders. Fear still showed in their faces, but something else was growing there too. A small spark of hope. A tiny possibility that maybe, just maybe, the impossible could become possible. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, he said finally, you have 1 hour to present a detailed operational plan. If it shows any reasonable chance of success, I will authorize you to implement it. Katie felt her heart racing. 1 hour to save entire civilizations. 1 hour to turn 2% into something better. 1 hour to prove that humans could find hope where others saw only darkness. She saluted sharply. Yes, sir. I will not let you down. Katie had 30 minutes left when she finished her operational plan. The document glowed on her tablet screen, filled with diagrams and tactical movements that broke every rule in the Coalition military handbook. She had requested permission to hand-select her own team, knowing that traditional soldiers would never be able to execute what she had in mind. Admiral Zexther approved her personnel requests without reading them carefully. He was busy coordinating the evacuation of 3 nearby colonies and preparing the main fleet for what everyone assumed would be their final battle. Katie understood his position, but she also knew that her unconventional team was the key to everything. Her first stop was the pilot quarters on Deck 7. Jake Martinez sat alone in the corner, working on a flight simulator that most pilots considered impossible to complete. His service record showed 17 official reprimands for unauthorized maneuvers and creative interpretations of flight protocols. Other pilots avoided him because his flying style made them nervous. "Jake, I need to talk to you," Katie said, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up from his simulator with tired eyes. "If this is about the barrel roll I did through the asteroid field yesterday, I can explain why it was necessary. Actually, that is exactly why I'm here. I watched the flight recorder data. You pulled off a maneuver that should have torn your ship apart. How did you know it would work?" Jake shrugged. "I did not know. But staying in formation would have meant flying straight into that plasma storm. Sometimes you have to try something crazy instead of something safe that will definitely kill you." Katie smiled. This was exactly the kind of thinking she needed. How would you like to try something really crazy? Something that might save the entire coalition. 20 minutes later, Jake had agreed to join her team. He did not ask many questions about the mission details. When Katie explained that they would be operating behind enemy lines with minimal support, he just nodded and asked when they would leave. Her next recruit was Dr. Lisa Campbell from the Xenobiology Department. Lisa spent most of her time studying alien psychology and communication patterns. The other scientists considered her work interesting, but not particularly useful for military applications. Katie disagreed. She found Lisa in her laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays showing Vorthan social structures. "Dr. Campbell, I need someone who understands how aliens think. Really understands, not just the basic cultural briefings they give to diplomats." Lisa looked up from her data. "Are you planning some kind of psychological warfare? Because the Vorthans are notoriously resistant to mental manipulation techniques." "Not manipulation. Understanding. I need to know how they will react when their perfectly organized battle plans start falling apart. I need to predict their responses when we do things they do not expect." Lisa studied Katie carefully. "You are planning something unconventional. Very unconventional. Will you help us?" Lisa saved her work and stood up. "When do we start?" Katie's third team member was harder to find. Danny Rodriguez worked in the communications center, but he spent most of his off-duty time in the maintenance tunnels. Other crew members whispered that he was strange, always talking to the ship's computer systems like they were people. Katie had heard different rumors. She had heard that Danny could make any computer do things its designers never intended. She found him in a forgotten storage room, surrounded by dismantled communication equipment. Cables and circuit boards covered every surface. Danny looked up when she entered, his hands covered in electronic components. "Lieutenant Commander Brooks, I heard you were putting together some kind of special mission. Word travels fast on. A ship. Are you interested?" Danny gestured at his improvised workshop. "I have been working on something. A way to intercept and modify Vorthan communication signals. The official channels said it was impossible because their encryption is too advanced. But impossible just means nobody has tried the right approach yet." Katie felt excitement building. "Show me." Danny activated a small device that immediately began displaying Vorthan military communications. The text scrolled past in their angular script, but a translation program converted it to Coalition Standard. "I cannot break their encryption, but I can insert small changes into their data streams. Nothing obvious, just tiny modifications that accumulate over time, like introducing errors into their targeting systems." "Exactly. Or making their navigation computers drift slightly off course, or causing their supply requests to get sent to the wrong locations." Katie had found her communications specialist. The most difficult recruitment came next. Katie needed someone who understood Vorthan military tactics from the inside. There was only one person on the ship who fit that description, and asking him. To join her team was a significant risk. Kethver lived in isolation in the restricted section of the ship. He was a Vorthan defector who had provided intelligence to the Coalition for the past 2 years. Most crew members did not trust him, and many believed he was still loyal to his former empire. Katie had read his psychological evaluations and his debriefing reports. She had a different opinion. She found him in his small quarters, meditating in the traditional Vorthan manner. His gray skin showed the ritual scars that marked him as a former military officer. When he opened his eyes, they held no surprise at seeing her. "You wish to ask me to betray my own species again," he said in his precise, accented voice. "I want to ask you to help me save both our species. The Vorthans will not stop with the Coalition. Eventually, they will turn on each other. Your people will suffer under their own empire, just like everyone else." Kethvar stood slowly. "What do you propose?" Katie explained her plan in general terms. She watched his face carefully as she described the small team tactics and the goals of disrupting Vorthan coordination. His expression remained neutral until she mentioned the communication jamming. "You plan to attack our command networks directly?" "Yes, this could work. The Vorthan military has never faced an enemy willing to operate without central coordination. We would not know how to respond to truly independent units." "Will you help us?" Kethver was quiet for a long moment. "My people exiled me for questioning her expansion policies. They declared me dead to our society. Perhaps it is time to make that declaration mutual." With her core team assembled, Katie spent the remaining hours before deployment running them through basic coordination exercises. Jake practiced flying in tight formation with minimal communication. Lisa studied Vorthan panic responses and command structure weaknesses. Danny worked on perfecting his signal interference techniques. Kethvar provided detailed maps of Vorthan ship layouts and security protocols. They were an unusual group. A reckless pilot, a theoretical scientist, a computer expert who talked to machines, and a traitor to his own species. By all traditional military standards, they should never have been allowed near a combat mission. But Katie was not planning a traditional military operation. She was planning to do something that had never been tried before, something that would require exactly the kind of creative thinking and adaptive responses that her strange team could provide. As the Vorthan fleet approached their sector, Katie looked at her assembled volunteers. They were scared but determined. They understood the odds they faced. They knew that most of them would probably not survive the mission, but they also understood something that the quantum computers had missed. Sometimes the most unlikely people could accomplish the most impossible things. Sometimes being different was better than being perfect. The Vorthan fleet arrived exactly when their intelligence predicted. 17,000 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. Katie watched from the bridge of her small assault craft as this massive enemy fleet took position. Each Vorthan ship was 3 times larger than anything the Coalition possessed. Admiral Zexther's voice crackled over the communication system. "All units, prepare for engagement. Remember, we only need to buy time for the evacuation transports to escape." Katie looked at her team strapped into their seats around her. Jake sat at the pilot controls, his hands steady despite the sweat on his forehead. Lisa monitored alien communication channels, her face pale but determined. Danny worked frantically on his modified equipment, preparing to jam Vorthan signals. Kethvar studied tactical displays, marking weak points in the enemy formation. Coalition. Fleet, advance to engagement range. Admiral Zexther ordered. The main Coalition fleet moved forward to meet the Vorthans. Katie counted 4,000 Coalition ships against 17,000 enemy vessels. The math was still terrible, but the frontal assault would draw all Vorthan attention away from her small team. "Jake, take us into the asteroid field," Katie commanded. Jake's hands moved over the controls with practiced skill. Their ship banked sharply away from the main fleet and dove toward a dense field of spinning rocks. The asteroids were considered a navigation hazard by most pilots. The gravitational forces created unpredictable currents that could crush a ship without warning. "Katie, the navigation computer is screaming at me," Jake said calmly. "It says this route is impossible." "Good. That means the Vorthans will not expect us to use it." Their ship twisted between massive rocks, following a path that existed only in Jake's intuitive understanding of physics and momentum. Behind them, the first sounds of battle echoed across space as the two main fleets began firing at each other. Dr. Lisa monitored Vorthan communications during their dangerous passage. Their chatter is very organized. Perfect coordination between all ships. They are treating this like a standard battle exercise. "That will change soon," Katie said, checking her mission timeline. They emerged from the asteroid field deep behind Vorthan lines. Jake had somehow navigated them through what should have been certain death, bringing them out exactly where Katie had planned. Ahead of them lay the Vorthan supply convoy, a line of massive cargo ships protected by only a light escort. "Danny, are you ready?" Katie asked. Danny looked up from his jury-rigged equipment. "I have been intercepting their supply coordination signals for the past hour. I can introduce errors that will send their supply ships to wrong coordinates." "Do it." Danny's fingers flew over his controls. On his screen, Katie could see Vorthan supply requests being modified in real time. Ships expecting ammunition were redirected to food supplies. Medical equipment was sent to ships that needed fuel. The changes were small and would take time to create noticeable effects. "Kethfer, what about their escort pattern?" The Vorthan defector studied the enemy formation with professional interest. Very standard. They assumed no enemy could penetrate this far behind their lines. The escort ships are positioned for show, not for real defense. Katie activated her team's communication network. They had practiced this approach dozens of times, but never under real combat conditions. "All teams begin Phase 1. Their assault." Craft split into 4 smaller ships, each one piloted by a different team member. Jake took the direct approach, using his modified fighter to attack the supply convoy's main escort. His ship danced between enemy fire, moving in patterns that seemed impossible, but somehow worked. Lisa flew her ship toward the Vorthan communication relays. Her scientific training had taught her exactly where to hit their network nodes to cause maximum disruption. She avoided direct combat, instead focusing on precision strikes against undefended technical equipment. Danny positioned his craft near the main data transmission hub. From there, he could inject his signal modifications directly into the Vorthan command network. Every message that passed through his location got slightly altered, creating small errors that would accumulate over time. Kethfer took the most dangerous assignment. He flew directly toward the Vorthan command ship, using his knowledge of their security protocols to avoid detection. His goal was to plant tracking devices that would allow them to monitor enemy command decisions. Katie coordinated their attacks while piloting her own ship toward a Vorthan supply depot. The enemy had not expected any resistance this far from the main battle. Their defenses were minimal, and their response was confused. She watched her tactical display as Jake's fighter destroyed 2 escort ships with impossible maneuvers. The Vorthan pilots could not predict his movements because his flying style broke every rule of physics that their training had taught them. Lisa's precision strikes took out 3 communication nodes before the enemy realized they were under attack. Without those relays, several Vorthan squadrons lost contact with their command structure. Danny's signal corruption began showing results as Vorthan supply ships started arriving at wrong locations. Confusion spread through their logistics network as critical resources ended up in the wrong places. Kethver successfully planted his tracking devices on the enemy command ship. His intimate knowledge of Vorthan procedures allowed him to bypass their security systems without triggering any alarms. Katie's own attack on the supply depot was more direct. She used her ship's weapons to destroy storage facilities filled with Vorthan ammunition and spare parts. The explosions lit up space like miniature suns, but their success came with a price. Enemy reinforcements arrived faster than expected. Jake's fighter took heavy damage while escaping from his attack run. Lisa's ship lost its main engines after a lucky Vorthan shot. Danny had to abandon his position when enemy ships finally located his transmission source. All teams regroup at coordinates 77 Alpha, Katie ordered. They met at a predetermined location, deeper in Vorthan space. Jake's ship was barely flying, held together by emergency repairs and stubborn determination. Lisa transferred to Katie's craft after her engines failed completely. Danny's equipment was damaged, but still functional. "Status report," Katie said as they regrouped. "We hurt them," Jake said, wincing as he moved his injured arm. "But they are adapting faster than we expected." Lisa checked her analysis of Vorthan. Communications. Their command structure is showing stress. The supply problems are creating uncertainty in their battle plans. Danny examined his damaged equipment. "I can still modify their signals, but not for much longer. This gear was never designed for extended combat operations." Kethver studied the tactical situation with growing concern. "We have achieved surprise, but that advantage will not last. The Vorthans are beginning to understand that they face something different from normal military operations." Katie looked at her damaged team and their barely functional ships. They had succeeded in their first objectives, but the real test was still ahead. The enemy was starting to realize that someone was operating behind their lines. Soon they would face organized resistance instead of confused surprise. "We continue with Phase 2, she decided. "The main Vorthan fleet is still focused on the frontal battle. If we can maintain pressure on their command systems, we might be able to create the cascade failure I calculated." Her team nodded, despite their injuries and damaged equipment. They understood the stakes. Every moment they could maintain their attacks was another chance for the impossible to become possible. The battle for survival was just beginning. Katie watched the main battle through her long-range sensors while her team prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The Coalition fleet was losing badly. 300 ships had been destroyed in the first hour of fighting. Admiral Zexther was pulling his forces back toward the evacuation zone, trying to buy more time for civilian transports to escape. But something was changing in the Vorthan formation. Their perfect coordination was starting to show cracks. Ships were arriving late to assigned positions. Supply convoys were delivering the wrong materials to the wrong locations. Communication delays were causing hesitation in their attack patterns. "It is working," Lisa said, monitoring enemy transmissions from her position at Katie's sensor station. "Their command structure is showing signs of stress. Officers are questioning orders that seem contradictory." Danny looked up from his damaged equipment with a tired smile. "My signal modifications are spreading through their entire network. Every message they send gets a little bit corrupted. Nothing obvious, just tiny changes that make their coordination less perfect." Jake winced as he adjusted his injured arm, but his voice remained steady. "My fighter is barely holding together, but I can make one more attack run. Where do you need me?" Katie studied the tactical display, showing the massive Vorthan command ship at the center of their formation. It was a fortress in space, protected by layers of defensive screens and surrounded by elite guard vessels. According to every military doctrine she had ever studied, attacking it directly would be suicide. "We are going after their flagship," she announced. Cuthbert looked up from his analysis of Vorthan defensive patterns. "Katie, that ship has defenses that could stop an entire fleet. We have 4 damaged craft and jury-rigged equipment." "Exactly. They will never expect us to try something so obviously impossible." She pulled up the detailed scans that Cuthbert had obtained during his reconnaissance mission. The command ship was enormous, bristling with weapons and protected by energy shields. That could deflect anything short of a direct hit from a capital ship's main guns. "But look at this," Katie said, highlighting a section of the ship's hull. "Their defensive systems are designed to stop large-scale attacks. They have overlapping fields that can absorb massive amounts of energy. But those same fields create blind spots for small, fast-moving targets." Jake studied her proposed attack vector with professional interest. "You want me to thread between their defensive grids? The margin for error is maybe 2 meters. Can you do it?" Jake managed a weak grin. "Probably not. But definitely not is worse than probably not." Lisa had been listening to Vorthan communications during their planning session. "Their command staff is growing increasingly frustrated with the coordination problems we have been causing. They are starting to make emotional decisions instead of logical ones." "Good. Emotional decisions create opportunities." Danny finished his repairs on the signal jamming equipment. "I have been analyzing their command network architecture. If I can get close enough to their main communication hub, I can do more than just corrupt their messages. I can turn their own network against them." "Explain." "Their ships are so used to receiving orders from the flagship that they do not question the source. If I can take control of their communication system, I can send false orders that will look completely legitimate." Katie felt a dangerous idea forming in her mind. "You mean we could order their own ships to attack each other?" "Theoretically, yes. But I would need direct access to their primary communication array. That means getting inside their flagship." The plan that emerged from their discussion was insane even by human standards. They would approach the command ship during the confusion of a major fleet engagement. Jake would pilot their remaining assault craft through the defensive grid using a flight path that existed only in theory. Lisa would analyze Vorthan's psychological responses to help them predict enemy reactions. Danny would attempt to hack their command network from the inside. Cuthbert would guide them through the ship's internal layout. "If we fail, we all die," Katie said simply. "If we succeed, we might save everyone. Are you willing to try?" Her team looked at each other. They were injured, exhausted, and flying equipment that should have been scrapped hours ago. By any reasonable measure, they had already accomplished more than anyone had expected. They could retreat now and know they had done their best. Instead, Jake fired up their damaged engines. "Let us go break some rules." Their approach to the Vorthan flagship began during the heaviest fighting of the battle. The coalition fleet was making a desperate final push, trying to draw as many enemy ships as possible away from the evacuation zone. Explosions lit up space as hundreds of ships exchanged fire at close range. Jake used the chaos as cover, piloting their craft through debris fields and energy discharges that would have destroyed most ships. His injured arm made the controls difficult to manage, but his instinctive understanding of physics allowed him to find paths through the battlefield that should not have existed. "Vorthan defensive grid in range," Lisa reported. "They are focused on the main battle. Minimal sensor coverage in our approach vector." Katie watched the massive command ship grow larger on their screens. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, its hull covered with weapons that could vaporize entire cities. This was the heart of Vorthan military power, the source of the coordination that made their empire unbeatable. "Danny, are you ready?" "As ready as I can be with equipment held together by hope and spare wire." Jake began his final approach, threading their ship between defensive energy fields that crackled with enough power to melt asteroids. A margin for error was even smaller than they had calculated. One wrong move would trigger alarms that would bring the entire Vorthen fleet down on them. Almost there, Jake whispered, his hands moving over controls with surgical precision. Alarms suddenly began sounding throughout their ship, not from enemy detection, but from structural failure. Their damaged craft was finally giving up under the stress of combat maneuvering. Hull breach in Section 3, Lisa reported calmly. Life support failing in the engine compartment. How long do we have? Katie asked. Maybe 10 minutes before the ship breaks apart completely. Jake looked back at his team with grim determination. Then we better make this count. He pushed their dying ship through the final gap in the defensive grid. Ahead of them, the Vorthen flagship filled their entire view. They had done the impossible. They had penetrated the most heavily defended position in the galaxy. Now they had to figure out how to get inside before their ship disintegrated around them. Jake crashed their dying ship into the Vorthen flagship's docking bay with the kind of controlled disaster that only he could manage. Sparks flew from damaged systems as their craft slid across the metal deck, leaving a trail of debris and smoke. Emergency alarms echoed throughout the massive enemy vessel. Katie unbuckled herself from her seat and grabbed her weapon. Around her, the team moved with practiced efficiency despite their injuries. They had maybe 5 minutes before Vorthen security forces would surround the docking bay. "Danny, how long do you need to access their communication system?" she asked. "Give me 15 minutes, and I can turn their entire fleet against itself," he replied, shouldering his modified equipment. "You have got 10 minutes. After that, this ship will be crawling with security troops." Kethver led them through corridors that he knew from his years serving in the Vorthen military. His knowledge of ship layouts and security protocols was the only reason they made it past the first checkpoint without being detected. "Command center is 3 levels up," he whispered as they moved through maintenance tunnels. "But they will have increased security after our attack on their supply lines." Lisa monitored Vorthen communications through her portable equipment. "Their officers are confused about the docking bay crash. They think it might be debris from the main battle. We have a few more minutes before they realize we are here." They climbed through service shafts and emergency passages, moving deeper into the heart of Vorthen power. Katie could feel the massive ship vibrating around them as its weapons fired at the Coalition fleet. Every blast meant more of her people were dying while she tried to execute an impossible plan. The communication center was exactly where Kethver had predicted. Through a maintenance grate, they could see Vorthen technicians working at control stations, coordinating the movements of 17,000 ships. The room hummed with the energy of quantum computers, processing millions of tactical decisions every second. "There," Danny whispered, pointing at a central console. "That is their primary communication hub. If I can access that system, I can send orders to their entire fleet." Katie counted 12 Vorthen technicians in the room. Her team had 4 people, limited ammunition, and equipment that was barely functional. By any reasonable calculation, they could not take and hold the communication center long enough for Danny to complete his work. But Katie had stopped believing in reasonable calculations hours ago. "We go in fast and hard," she decided. "Lisa, jam their internal communications so they cannot call for help. Kethver, you know their emergency procedures. Use that knowledge to create as much confusion as possible. Jake, watch our backs and be ready to fly us out of here when Danny finishes." They burst through the maintenance grate with weapons firing. The Vorthen technicians were caught completely off guard. Katie had counted on their assumption that no enemy could possibly penetrate this deep into their flagship. The battle for the communication center was brief but intense. Vorthen security training focused on external threats, not on close quarters combat inside their own ships. Katie's team moved with desperate efficiency, using their knowledge of human unpredictability to stay one step ahead of enemy responses. Within 3 minutes, they controlled the room. Danny immediately began connecting his equipment to the Vorthen communication system while Lisa sealed the entrances. Jake positioned himself at the main door with a weapon salvaged from a fallen enemy soldier. "How much time do you need?" Katie asked Danny. "Their encryption is more complex than I expected, but I think I can break it. Give me 8 more minutes." Through the sealed doors, they could hear Vorthen security forces gathering in the corridors outside. Heavy footsteps and shouted orders indicated that their presence was no longer a secret. "Katie, we have got company," Jake reported. "Sounds like at least 50 troops moving into position." Kethver worked frantically at a secondary console. "I am accessing their internal security system. If I can trigger emergency lockdown procedures, it will buy us more time." Lisa continued monitoring enemy communications while helping Danny with the technical aspects of his network infiltration. Their command staff is starting to panic. The coordination problems we caused earlier are getting worse. Explosions echoed through the ship as the Coalition fleet pressed their attack outside. Katie realized that Admiral Zexter was probably making his final desperate push, spending the last of his resources to give the evacuation transports more time to escape. "Danny, whatever you are going to do it now," she said. "Almost there. I just need to bypass their final security protocol." The doors to the communication center began glowing red as Vorthen troops outside used cutting tools to break through Lisa's barricades. Plasma fire started burning through the metal barriers. 30 seconds, Jake warned. Danny's equipment suddenly came alive with data streams. "I am in. I have access to their entire command network." His fingers moved across his controls with incredible speed. On the screens around them, Katie could see false orders being transmitted to the Vorthen fleet. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly for hours suddenly received contradictory commands. "Attack Formation 7-7, Danny. BROADCAST to half the fleet while simultaneously ordering the other half to retreat to defensive positions." The beautiful Vorthen battle formation began to break apart as ships followed conflicting instructions. Fire on Coalition targets went to some squadrons while others received orders to cease fire and regroup. Confusion spread through the enemy. Fleet like a virus, carried by their own communication system. But Danny was not finished. Using his understanding of Vorthen psychology, he began sending orders that would turn their disciplined military machine against itself. Squadron Alpha, eliminate traitors in Squadron Beta. Command ship under attack by internal saboteurs. All nearby vessels respond. The results exceeded even Katie's wildest hopes. Through the flagship's own sensors, she watched as Vorthen ships began firing on each other. Their perfect coordination collapsed into chaos as units tried to follow orders that made no sense when combined together. The door finally gave way, and Vorthen security troops poured into the communication center, but it was too late. Danny had already uploaded a virus into their network that would continue spreading false orders throughout their fleet. The battle that followed was desperate and close. Katie's team fought with the fury of people who knew they had already accomplished the impossible and just needed to survive long enough to see the results. Jake fell first, taking plasma fire while protecting Danny's equipment. Lisa was hit while trying to maintain their communication jamming. Kethver used his body to shield the others from a grenade blast that should have killed them all. When the shooting stopped, only Katie and Danny remained conscious. Around them, the Vorthen flagship shuddered as its own fleet fired on it in response to the false orders. Danny had transmitted dot through failing sensors. Katie watched the impossible happen. The mighty Vorthen fleet was destroying itself. Ships that had never known defeat were being torn apart by their own eyes. The 2% survival probability had become a 98% victory. Admiral Zexther's voice crackled over the emergency. Communication. Channel. All coalition units. The enemy fleet is in complete disarray. Press the attack. Repeat. Press the attack. Katie smiled as consciousness faded. Her impossible plan had worked. The human girl who refused to accept defeat had turned certain extinction into overwhelming victory. When the historians wrote about the Battle of Kepler Station, they would struggle to explain how such a small team had accomplished so much. But Katie knew the answer was simple. Sometimes the most unlikely people, using the most impossible plans, could change the fate of entire civilizations. All it took was the refusal to give up hope.